somewhere beyond the stars, past the trembling edge of what we think we understand. The universe may not be flying forward into nothingness, but curving softly, silently, back toward itself. Not in a crash, not in a blaze, but like a ribbon folding in slow motion, following a rhythm too large, too old, for us to hear. What we call expansion may only be one gesture in a much older dance. A breath drawn in before the long exhale. We've been taught to imagine a beginning, a sudden flash, a big bang, the first spark where everything began. But beginnings are comforting illusions. They draw a neat line between nothing and something, between silence and song. And yet, what if that line has no end because it never had a true beginning? What if the Big Bang wasn't a birth, but a return? What if the end of all things is not a final silence, but the soft click of the same story starting again? Maybe this moment, this life, this vast stretch of space, is just a loop repeating itself across a canvas so enormous that we've mistaken it for a straight path. And if that's true, then everything we know might not be once, but forever. We think of time as a straight arrow, one direction, one story, one beginning, one end. It's a story we've wrapped around everything, around our own lives, around the rise and fall of stars, around the universe itself. The Big Bang marked the starting gun, and since then, everything has been running forward. Galaxies racing apart, space stretching thinner, matter cooling, stars burning out like dying embers. Feels intuitive, clean, the kind of story that lets you say, this is how it all began, and someday, this is how it all will end. But nature rarely honors the stories we find most comforting. Physics, especially, is full of tricks. The deeper we dig, the less the universe behaves like a line and more like a riddle. Einstein once thought time was absolute like everyone else, but then his own equations whispered otherwise. Time bends, slows, stretches. It responds to gravity, sewn into the fabric of space, not floating above it like a god, but tangled into every movement, every mass, every flicker of light. And once you allow time to bend, it's not a far leap to imagine it turning, looping, returning. Some of Einstein's solutions, strange, mathematically valid ones, describe universes where time does just that, where it doesn't move endlessly forward, but bends back to its own beginning, where space itself may be finite, but without a border. Imagine walking in one direction forever, never hitting a wall, yet somehow circling back to where you began. Not because the universe is infinite, but because it's curved like the surface of a sphere, but in dimensions we can't draw. In such a universe, time might do the same. And if time is curved, if causality itself moves in loops, then what we call a beginning might only be a return. This idea is not just poetic, it's embedded in serious theoretical work. In some cosmological models, time is what they call closed time-like curves, a technical term that means, in essence, that you could walk through time the way you might walk a mountain trail that loops back to the start. These aren't science fiction fantasies. They're mathematical ghosts inside equations we already trust. Most physicists set them aside. Too strange, too difficult, too dangerous, perhaps, for what they imply. But others look at these loops and wonder, what if they're not glitches, but glimpses? What if the universe itself lives inside such a curve? What if the Big Bang wasn't the first moment, but simply the moment where the loop folds back on itself? The beginning and the end, touching. It challenges everything we think we know. Because we don't just see time as linear, we feel it that way. We feel the push of the past behind us, the tug of the future ahead. Our memories line up behind us like fallen dominoes. Our deaths sit somewhere in front. But that, too, may be illusion, the result of biology, of perspective. The universe doesn't owe us a straight path just because we walk one. If you look at the cosmic background, the ancient radiation left over from the Big Bang, you don't see a neat story. You see echoes, fractals, spots that seem out of place. Some scientists believe there might be clues there, hints that this universe has happened before, that patterns are repeating, that what we see as noise might be memory. But perhaps the most unsettling idea is this If time is curved, and the universe is a loop, then there is no true before, no true after, only the circle, and we, humans, stars, everything are swept along that curve not once but always, not as individuals, perhaps, but as possibilities, repeating across the vast breadth of existence like a melody that plays itself again and again, never quite the same, never entirely different. And if that's true, then the Big Bang wasn't the moment everything began. It was the place where the loop folds in, a place that feels like a beginning because it's where memory breaks, like the point on a record where the groove returns to the start. But just as music isn't made of one note, existence may not be built from one beginning. It may be built from rhythm, from repetition, from the circle that holds both birth and death, time and timelessness. This doesn't mean the universe is predictable. A loop doesn't have to repeat the same song exactly. It can shift, swell, mutate. The tempo can change. The notes can rearrange. The possibilities are infinite within the bounds of the loop. But it does mean that linearity, the belief in a clean start and a final end, is a simplification. A useful story for fragile creatures like us, but not, perhaps, the real shape of things. There is something haunting about that thought, something deeply beautiful and deeply humbling. We like to believe we are hurtling towards some kind of conclusion, heat, death, collapse, transcendence. But maybe we're not headed anywhere new. Maybe we're following a path already traced, one step in an endless orbit. Maybe the universe is not a journey, but a ritual, not a voyage, but a return. And yet, within that return, everything matters. Every atom, every choice, every flicker of consciousness adds its thread to the pattern. Even if the path loops, it still winds through wonder, through birth, through light, through thought, through everything we are and everything we forget. And when it returns, when it bends back into itself, we may not remember. But the curve remembers. The loop remembers. So perhaps we should stop asking what started the universe and start asking what keeps it circling. Because in the end, it may not be the bang that defines us, but the beat. They say the idea is new, that only in recent decades have we begun to imagine the universe as something that might loop, that might breathe in and out like a great cosmic lung. But the truth is older, much older. Before equations, before telescopes, before light was ever measured or stars were named, people looked into the night sky and saw something that never quite ended. The sun rose and set, again and again. Seasons returned. Tides came and went. Death gave way to birth, and birth always pointed back toward death. Life moved in circles. So why shouldn't the cosmos? In the ancient Vedas, the universe was not born once, but cycled, created, destroyed, and recreated across unimaginable spans of time. Each cycle lasting billions of years, countless lifetimes of humans and gods. In the Stoic philosophy of Greece, the cosmos too was fire and return, ekpyrosis, the great conflagration, cleansing everything, resetting time itself. There was no straight path forward, only a spiral that folded back into itself after every revolution. Modern science abandoned these ancient patterns for a while. It had to. Discovery demanded simplicity, and nothing is simpler than a bang. An origin, a start, a place to hang all future truths. The Big Bang gave us that, a moment of raw creation, when space and time blinked into existence, when all things that would ever be were born from a single point. Perfect zero. And for decades, we believed that moment stood alone. No past. Just a singularity. A kind of magic dressed in math. But the longer we stared into the equations, the more the magic began to crumble. Singularities are not explanations, they are confessions. They tell us, this is where our tools break. This is where the math says nothing. And that silence is loud. Physicists, even those who first embraced the Big Bang, began to suspect that maybe it wasn't the beginning at all. Maybe it was just a door. And what lies on the other side of that door is something stranger, but also more familiar than we might expect. A cycle. A universe that does not begin and end, but beats. A rhythm, not a line. A pulse, not a one-time explosion. This is the idea behind what many now call the cyclic model. It's not a single theory, but a family of them. In all of them, the universe expands, but not forever. It stretches outward, like a slingshot drawn back. But at some point, some distant, forgotten moment in the far future, that expansion slows. Gravity, once weak and stretched thin, begins to whisper again. The momentum fades. Galaxies drift less. Space itself cools, settles, resists. And then, quietly, the pull begins. The universe contracts. Not in fire, but in pressure. Not suddenly, but inevitably. The galaxies that once raced away now begin to move inward. Light shifts. Heat returns. The stars that had long burned out may be swept into a sea of merging black holes, all collapsing together in a dark tide of unimaginable density, until finally everything folds in. And at that point, the loop closes, because what collapses does not simply vanish, compresses, tightens, and then it bursts. A new Big Bang, a new expansion, a new universe. The same? Not quite, but not entirely different either. This is not reincarnation in the religious sense. It's not a soul being reborn. It's the cosmos itself being reborn in form and possibility. The same laws may apply. The same constants may hold, or they may shift ever so slightly. Matter might rearrange. Galaxies might spin in new spirals. Life might emerge again or not at all. It's not repetition. It's return with variation. A wheel that never rolls exactly the same way twice. And if this is true, if the universe is truly cyclic, then everything around us is ancient in ways we cannot comprehend. Not just billions of years old, but perhaps one cycle out of trillions. Imagine, the stars overhead may have burned in countless skies before. Your breath may carry atoms that danced in a different version of Earth. One that existed eons ago and was swallowed by a collapse you never knew occurred. And now here you are, living in the long exhale of a universe that has breathed forever. But there's more, because cycles don't just return, they build. Over time, systems that repeat also refine. Feedback loops evolve. What if consciousness itself is part of the pattern? What if, with every cosmic turn, something remembers? Something carries forward the lessons of the last spiral? That's the terrifying beauty of the cyclic universe. It gives us a frame that's vast, humbling, and alive. The Big Bang is no longer the beginning. It is one breath in an infinite tide. A tide we rise and fall with, whether we know it or not. And still, somewhere in the future, another contraction waits. Another collapse. And then, as always, rebirth. But if this cycle is real, if the universe breathes in this long and silent rhythm, then what exactly pulls it back? What hand reaches out to halt the expansion, to gather the stars once more into the palm of a singularity? In the story we've been told for the past few decades, the universe is expanding forever, driven not just by the momentum of the Big Bang, but by something stranger, dark energy. A name that sounds like science fiction, and in truth may as well be. It's not a substance we've touched. It's not a force we fully understand. It's a placeholder, an echo, a necessary ghost in the mathematics. Something invisible is pushing galaxies apart faster and faster, like a hidden wind in the fabric of space. And for a time, that led many to believe the universe would never return. That expansion would accelerate until everything grew so far apart. No light could bridge the distance. That the cosmos would die cold, thin, and silent. But not every model agrees. Some whisper of dark energy that might be temporary. Phase, not a law. Something that waxes and eventually wanes. If that's true, if this unseen pressure loses strength, then gravity, the oldest sculptor in the universe, might one day resume its slow, steady pull. Not suddenly, not in a great reversal, but like a hand tugging gently at a thread, drawing the tapestry inward, stitch by stitch. There are theories, quiet ones, rarely spoken outside of certain circles, that propose the universe has done this before, that the current expansion is just a phase in a much longer cycle, and that in a future we cannot yet imagine, the expansion will slow, falter, and fall inward again, not because of some sudden cataclysm, but because of a balance too subtle for us to see. The same balance that once let the universe bloom may one day ask it to fold. But what happens during the collapse? That part, even the boldest minds admit, lies wrapped in shadow. The mathematics begins to tremble. The equations we trust become unstable or worse, silent. Because collapsing a universe is not like reversing time on a film reel. Entropy resists, chaos grows, structures fall apart in strange ways. Black holes merge, swallowing everything around them. Space contracts, temperatures rise. The entire cosmos begins to burn, not with flame but with compression. And yet, some theories suggest that at the very moment of collapse, just before all things vanish into a single point, something extraordinary happens. The laws of physics reset. The field lines tangle and snap. Time as we know it loses its shape. And from this crucible, a moment neither here nor there, neither before nor after, the loop closes. A new beginning erupts, as inevitable as breath after silence. But perhaps not everything is lost. There's a version of this theory, a haunting one, that says traces of previous universes survive. That in the new universe, born fresh from the old, there remain faint fingerprints. Not in matter, not in memory, but in the shape of the cosmos itself. The cosmic microwave background, the quiet hum left over from the Big Bang, contains strange patterns. Circles that should not be there. Cold spots that don't quite fit. Most scientists dismiss them. Anomalies, artifacts, noise. But what if they're echoes? Some believe these patterns are scars, faint and fading, from a universe that came before. Not proof, perhaps, but a whisper. A memory caught in the folds of spacetime. A reminder that the universe is not as young as it seems. This is not consensus. It is not settled fact. But it is possibility, and possibility, in the absence of certainty, is the closest thing we have to a map. And if even part of it is true, then we are not living in the first universe. We may not even be living in the millionth. We might be one breath in an infinite succession of breaths, a single note in a symphony without a final movement. And that changes everything, because it means existence itself may not be rare, or fragile or isolated. It may be inevitable. If the universe is a loop, then matter will return. Stars will reignite. Life perhaps will rise again. Not the same life, not the same stars, but echoes, variations, new dreams built from the ashes of forgotten ones. It's easy to feel small inside such a vision. A human life is brief, fragile, and filled with noise. But to exist at all within this turning is to be part of something vast, something ancient, something eternal. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. But if this has all happened before, then a stranger question begins to surface. Not just whether stars will burn again or galaxies spin again, but whether we have been here before. Whether consciousness, that faint flicker in the dark, also returns in each cycle, not as memory, not as the same person or thought, but as a phenomenon, as the universe thinking itself again. It's a dangerous question, seductive, because it invites the illusion of repetition, of fate, of cosmic déjà vu. But the truth may be subtler. In a looping universe, nothing must return exactly the same. Even if the laws stay constant, even if the rhythm holds, the dance may always change. Each cycle might carry within it new arrangements of matter, new emergent patterns, new chances. And within those chances, life might rise not out of design but inevitability. Not because it is written but because it is allowed. And still, there's a kind of poetry in imagining that long after this earth has gone quiet, long after our sun has died, something else may rise in the warmth of another star, on another version of another world, orbiting through the long exhale of another universe. That something might open its eyes, look to the stars and wonder. But the cyclic model doesn't only invite wonder, it brings discomfort. It asks us to abandon the clean comfort of a beginning and an end. It dissolves finality. In a looping cosmos, there is no before all this and no after. There is only the turn, the pulse, the slow orbit of everything. It means that even the end of our universe, the so-called heat death, when stars are gone and black holes evaporate, might not be the end at all. Just the turning point, just the fold, a silence before the next beginning. And that silence may be long, longer than we can imagine. For us, time is measured in decades, centuries, maybe a few millennia if we're generous. But the universe works on a scale that eats such numbers for breakfast. It may take trillions of years for the final stars to dim, trillions more for black holes to merge, decay, vanish. And only then, only in that darkness, would the next beat begin. And yet, even then, it wouldn't be the same. Some cyclic models suggest that with each loop, the universe grows, that entropy accumulates, that the cycles are not perfect resets, but shifts, slight tilts in the music, tiny changes that build across eons, like dust settling in a clock. The rhythm may hold, but the tune drifts. Others say no, that the cycle restores itself completely, like a spring wound and released in perfect tension. Each iteration a mirror of the last, indistinguishable in any way that matters. We don't know, but what we do know is this: the idea of a cyclic universe refuses to die. It lives in equations, it lives in observation, and it lives, perhaps most persistently, in us, in our myths, our philosophies, our hunger for return. There is something deeply human in the need to believe we're part of a pattern. Not a mistake, not a blip, not a single gasp in an empty void, but a breath in something ancient, something that will outlive us and somehow remember us, not as individuals, but as a moment. And maybe that's what the cyclic model offers. Not proof, not prophecy, but meaning. A different kind of immortality. Not one that preserves our names or our cities or our stories, but one that says, you were part of the turn. You were a moment in the pattern, a flicker in the breath of the cosmos. And when it all collapses, when everything folds in and the fire rises again, maybe it carries with it not only matter, but possibility. Maybe every universe is built on the ashes of the one before, not in punishment or reward, but in rhythm. And maybe, just maybe, that rhythm is enough. But if all of this is more than a beautiful idea, if the universe really does cycle, if time curves, if beginnings are only illusions, then surely something must remain. A trace, a scar, a clue left behind in the fabric of things. And so we look. We point our instruments into the dark and listen for echoes. Not of voices, not of stars, but of the loops themselves. The first whisper comes from something we still don't understand. A strange, quiet pressure that isn't light or matter or gravity. We call it dark energy, a name that hides our ignorance behind mystery. It doesn't shine, it doesn't touch, but it moves, or rather, it pushes. Space itself seems to expand under its influence, not slower but faster, as if being stretched from the inside. Galaxies are not just drifting apart. They're accelerating away from each other, as though some hidden breath were inflating the universe from within. That acceleration is real. We've measured it. And yet, the thing causing it, we cannot see. We cannot grasp. It doesn't clump into stars, doesn't bend light like gravity, doesn't follow the rules we've written. It simply is. Silent, distant, relentless. And the strangest part? Its strength. The value of dark energy, if it were even slightly different, stronger or weaker by a fraction, would tear the universe apart or stop it from ever expanding at all. But it doesn't do either. It sits in the middle on a razor's edge, balanced, suspiciously so, as if the universe was tuned, not built. As if this expansion is not infinite but conditional, temporary, a phase in a longer rhythm. Some physicists wonder if this balance is a sign, a suggestion that dark energy isn't permanent, that one day it may fade. And if it fades, the acceleration ends. The expansion stops, and gravity, quiet and patient, returns to center stage. It has waited before, can wait again. But the push of dark energy is not our only clue. There's another signal, older, colder, softer. A hum that fills the universe like the fading ring of a struck bell. It's called the cosmic microwave background. the afterglow of the Big Bang, not visible to the eye, but everywhere between stars, behind galaxies, inside the silence of space. It is the light left over from the time when the universe was young and hot and dense. Before stars, before atoms, just heat, racing outward. And now, cooled by time, stretched by expansion, it hangs like a soft mist over the cosmos. A background hum, a memory. We've mapped it in detail so fine. It's like looking at the fingerprints of creation. And in those patterns, those ripples and speckles, lies more than just beauty. There are oddities, spots that are too cold, rings that shouldn't exist, alignments that seem to defy randomness. Some say they are artifacts, glitches in the data, errors in the instruments. Others are not so sure. One idea, still controversial, is that these strange patterns are echoes, that they are the faint bruises left by previous cycles of the universe. If the cosmos collapses and rebounds again and again, each loop might leave a mark. Not obvious, not loud, but faint and circular, like rings in old wood. The cold spots, the circles, the alignments, they may be shadows from the last breath. This is not settled science. It is on the edge of what we can test. But the fact that such ideas are even possible, are even being whispered by the math, tells us something. That the universe may be remembering more than we thought. And then there's the theorem, the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, a piece of mathematics that stands like a wall across time, tells us, very simply, that if a universe is expanding, if it has, on average, moved outward, then it must have had a beginning. Cannot stretch forever backward. It must have started somewhere, somewhen. But that, too, depends on the assumption of time as a line, a direction, an arrow. Says nothing about loops, nothing about rebounds. It does not forbid a cycle, it only forbids a straight line that never began. Which means, the loop still lives. The cyclic universe doesn't pretend to explain everything. It doesn't rewrite all of physics. It doesn't claim certainty, but it lingers. It grows in the gaps between what we can see and what we cannot, in the balance of dark energy, in the quiet anomalies of background radiation, in the questions our best theorems still cannot answer. It asks us to look again, not for something new, but for something old, something ancient, something that has always been here, just behind the veil. And when we stare into the sky, into the soft light that has traveled for 14 billion years to reach us, perhaps what we're seeing is not just the beginning of this universe, but the residue of another, a different breath, a former turning, a ghost. The clues are faint, but they are there. But of course, the universe doesn't leave us answers, only riddles. We search for clues and find paradox. We try to read the sky, but the sky reads us back. Quiet, unblinking, patient. Take the light, for example. Not starlight, but the earliest light. That background hum, the cosmic microwave whisper that hovers between galaxies, isn't just a remnant. It's a map, a fossil. And in its faint, dappled texture lie stories we haven't yet learned how to tell. Some believe that its odd patterns, those subtle asymmetries, the curious cold spots, might be more than quirks. That they are the scars of something older. Not older in time, but older in memory. Something not meant to be in this universe at all. One such anomaly, sometimes called the cold spot, stretches across a patch of sky where the temperature is lower than expected. Not just slightly, but stubbornly. So much so that it has resisted every easy explanation. Maybe it's a statistical fluke. Maybe it's caused by a supervoid, a vast region of space with fewer galaxies, stretching light and making it appear cooler. But what if it isn't? Some cosmologists, standing right at the edge between mathematics and mythology, have suggested something more audacious. That the cold spot is a bruise left by a collision. Not with another galaxy, not even with another region of this universe, but with another universe entirely. Previous one that collapsed and rebounded, passing its shape, its imperfections, into the next, into ours. It's a wild idea, but the math allows it. In some models, each cycle of the universe leaves an imprint in the next. Not in matter, not in stars or dust, but in the energy fields that ripple through space at its birth. A kind of echo, like a handprint left on a window that keeps fogging over. And the cold spot isn't alone. Other features of the microwave background seem too orderly. The so-called axis of evil, a name as theatrical as it is provocative, refers to an unexpected alignment of fluctuations in the sky. The universe, as far as we know, should be isotropic, uniform in all directions. But these patterns seem to suggest an orientation, a structure, as if the universe, even at its earliest moment, remembered which way it had turned before. Some physicists dismiss these ideas. They call them artifacts, illusions, false patterns born of overanalysis. And they may be right. The cosmos is noisy, and our instruments imperfect. But there's something undeniably unsettling about how persistent these whispers are. They don't scream. They don't prove. They just linger. And then there's the silence. Because for all the signals we can hear, there are things we can't. At the moment of the Big Bang, if there even was such a moment, our understanding breaks. Physics dissolves. The equations grow unstable. They describe infinities. They stop making sense. And so we call that moment a singularity. But a singularity is not an answer. It's a white flag. It says, here is where knowledge ends. That silence might be the loudest clue of all. Because in a looping universe, there is no singularity, no 0 point, no instant where everything begins. Only a narrow passage, like the eye of a needle, through which the old cosmos pours into the new. It may look like a beginning. It may feel like one, but it is only a threshold. And what came before is not gone, just transformed. In recent years, theories like loop quantum cosmology have tried to describe this passage. To model the universe in such a way that the Big Bang is not a singularity but a bounce. In those equations, the universe contracts to a finite, dense state but not infinitely dense. Instead, quantum effects become dominant. Gravity, instead of collapsing into nothingness, becomes repulsive. And the universe rebounds. This is not fantasy. It's not even speculative in the way science fiction is speculative. It's mathematics, derived from equations we use to describe the real world. Equations that, when allowed to breathe outside the assumptions of linear time, offer something remarkable. A universe with no beginning, no true end, just a rhythm, a loop, and suddenly, everything we see becomes part of that rhythm. The expansion of galaxies, the slow drift of light, the cooling of space. They are not the aftermath of a single creation, but the pulse of a much longer story. A story told again and again, each time with different syllables, but the same breath. And somewhere in that breath we find ourselves. We are made of stardust. Yes, but perhaps also of memory. Not the memory of our own minds, but the memory of the cosmos itself. If this is not the first universe, then we are not the first witnesses, not the first questions, not the first wonder. And yet here we are, looking up, listening, searching the silence for meaning. We often think of evidence as something solid, something you can hold, measure, prove. But in cosmology, the edges of truth are not sharp. They blur, they shimmer. Sometimes the absence of something is more telling than its presence. A gap in the pattern, a silence where a sound should be, a softness in the dark that feels too deliberate to be chance. And this is where we find ourselves, surrounded by data, stars, light, radiation, expansion, and yet still haunted by a question that refuses to go away. Are we really living in the first version of this universe? Or just the latest? There are models, mathematical, elegant, provocative, that suggest we are deep within a structure far older than we can imagine. One such idea is conformal cyclic cosmology, proposed by physicist Roger Penrose. It doesn't look for a single beginning. It imagines instead a chain of eons, entire universes expanding and aging, only to pass their shape into the next. Not through collapse, but through something stranger, transformation. In this model, as the universe expands and matter thins and black holes evaporate, what remains is pure geometry, shapes without scale. And in that weightless, timeless sea, the stage is set for the next cycle to begin. The past and the future, stretched so far apart they begin to resemble each other, like two ends of a circle that finally touch. In Penrose's view, the universe doesn't bounce, it dissolves and reforms. The fire is replaced not by ashes, but by light too thin to burn, too stretched to care. And somehow, from that stillness, something stirs again. Another bang, another breath. Penrose even claims to have found clues, specific patterns in the cosmic background that, according to him, match what a previous aeon might leave behind, spots where ancient black holes might have left their deaths imprinted into the next cosmos. These ideas are not universally accepted. Many physicists are skeptical, but they linger. They press at the edge of what we're willing to imagine. And perhaps that's the real question. How much are we willing to imagine? Science is not about belief, but it is, in some ways, about permission. We can only see what we're willing to consider. And for a long time, we were taught to consider time as a line, a beginning as sacred, an end as inevitable. But now we're standing in a forest of loops, equations that allow for repetition, patterns that hint at return, mysteries that suggest memory. There's humility in admitting we don't know, but there's also beauty, because in that space of not knowing, the universe becomes alive again. Not a solved puzzle, but a living riddle. Not a machine, but a poem. And what is poetry, if not the return of feeling in new form? The same words, rearranged. The same breath, reshaped. So we look up. We measure redshift. We map radiation. We chart dark energy. But we also feel the weight of the questions. Why is the expansion so perfectly balanced? Why do these patterns in the sky refuse to smooth out? Why does our best mathematics, when taken to its limits, keep drawing circles? We may never answer these questions. Not fully, but we're not supposed to. The universe doesn't owe us resolution, only participation, and we are participating. In every breath, in every act of wonder, in every instrument we launch toward the stars, and every moment of stillness in which we simply stare into the dark, waiting for it to blink back. If this universe is one of many, then we are part of something truly endless. Not just in space, but in time. Not just in matter, but in pattern. We are not the first ones to wonder, and we won't be the last. And perhaps that's the most honest clue of all. Not the radiation, not the equations, not the cold spots or the dark energy or the bounces or the theorems, but the wonder itself. The fact that we can ask. The fact that we do ask. The fact that we wake up, against all odds, in a universe that dares us to understand it. Because even if we never do, we were here, and that is part of the loop now, too. Time only moves in one direction, or so we're told. Forward. From cause to effect, from birth to death, from memory to forgetting. It's the great river we cannot swim against. The law that binds every falling leaf, every burning star, every withering cell. And at the heart of this river is entropy. Entropy is what gives time its arrow. It's the reason why you remember the past but not the future, why a shattered glass doesn't reassemble, why heat spreads instead of gathers. It is the quiet, invisible tug that turns complexity into ruin, structure into dust. And no matter how far we look, we see entropy always increasing. Stars burn and fade. Galaxies drift apart. Systems dissolve. The universe, in all its grandeur, is growing colder, emptier, quieter. It's easy to see entropy as a villain, the slow destroyer, but in truth, it's something stranger. It doesn't destroy energy. Energy remains constant. It just rearranges it. It spreads it out. It hides it. Like ink dispersing in water, the shape disappears, but the substance remains. Entropy is the price of motion, of change, of time itself. Without it, nothing would ever happen. Nothing would begin. But because of it, everything must end. Or so we think. But what if this great destructor is not a final verdict, but part of a larger rhythm? What if entropy, too, has a cycle? There are theories on the fringes of cosmology, but mathematically coherent, that suggests something remarkable. That at the very moment the universe reaches its final entropy, when all heat is gone, when all motion ceases, when black holes have evaporated and time seems to flatten into silence, something happens. Not an explosion, not a divine reset, something quieter, more elegant. The arrow of time flips. Imagine it. A universe stretched to the brink, thin as gossamer, drained of order, then slowly folding in. A return not through fire, but through gravity, through inevitability. The scattered ashes of time begin to compress. The vast distances begin to close. Matter, what remains of it, collapses inward. The laws that governed expansion begin to bend. Pressure rises, curvature tightens, and at the very center of that collapse, entropy reaches its peak. All disorder is total. All temperature is balanced. Perfect, lifeless symmetry. But then, something astonishing. The singularity is not a wall, but a mirror. A place not of destruction, but inversion. The arrow of time, once pointing outward, snaps, turns, and what had been the end becomes the beginning. Not a sequel, a reflection. In this new universe, born from the death of the last, entropy begins again, but in reverse. Order increases. Stars form. Galaxies spin. Complexity arises not as a miracle, but as a consequence. It is a universe that remembers, not in knowledge, but in structure. It holds the echoes of the last cycle in the very shape of its constants. A different universe, but one that knows, somewhere deep in its bones, that it is not the first. This is not a fantasy. It emerges from serious physics. Some versions of loop quantum cosmology predict exactly this kind of mirror-like rebirth. Not just a bounce in space, but a reversal in time's flow. And not for us, the observers trapped within the arrow, but for the universe as a whole. From the outside, if such a view were possible, it would look like time had flipped, from collapse to expansion, from death to birth. But if this is true, then entropy is not a final wave but a pendulum. It swings not endlessly forward, but through arcs. And with each swing, a universe is born, lives, grows cold, and turns. And in that turning, something more subtle might occur. Not repetition, not identical rebirth, but evolution. Some theories suggest that each loop of the universe is not a perfect mirror of the last. The constants shift. The balance of forces, the strength of gravity, the mass of particles, the speed of light may vary just slightly from one cycle to the next. Small changes, imperceptible in the moment, but over countless iterations they build. A kind of cosmological memory, a slow drift through phase space, each universe giving birth to the next, nudged by the entropy and geometry of the last. A river of time that turns, but never retraces its path. And within that drift, life may emerge. Not every time, not everywhere, perhaps only in rare arrangements, rare combinations of physical law and chemical happenstance. Some universes may collapse sterile and dark, never knowing consciousness. Others, like ours, may bloom briefly with thought, with wonder, with eyes that look up and ask where it all began. And if this is so, then we might be both a fluke and a certainty. A fluke because the conditions that allow life are delicate, precise, balanced. A certainty because in an infinite chain of cycles, every possibility not forbidden must eventually arise, including this one, including us. And that is a different kind of comfort. Not the comfort of design, not the warmth of purpose, but the quiet awe of inevitability. We are not the point, but we are part of the pattern. And the pattern is vast. But what does it really mean for time to reverse? Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but physically within the machinery of the cosmos. We like to think of time as a river, flowing from the mountains of the past into the sea of the future. And in that river we float helpless, forward. But physics doesn't quite agree. The fundamental equations that govern reality, the motion of particles, the fields of quantum mechanics, the curves of general relativity are almost entirely time-symmetric. That is, they don't care if time runs forward or backward. The math works both ways. The only thing that doesn't is entropy. It is entropy that gives the arrow direction. It is entropy that makes the future different from the past. A glass breaks but doesn't unbreak. A body ages but doesn't grow young. It is entropy, not time itself, that makes us feel the flow. So when we talk about time flipping, what we may really mean is entropy flipping. At the moment of collapse, when the universe reaches maximum entropy, when everything is smeared out, homogenized, dead, the rules might no longer apply. Or rather, they may apply in reverse. Because at that moment, the structure of spacetime becomes so curved, so extreme, that quantum effects dominate. And quantum systems don't follow our classical intuitions. They are not fixed in direction. They are not bound by irreversible steps. In some models, this means that the high-entropy end state of one universe becomes the low-entropy starting point of another. And in doing so, it doesn't just loop, it inverts. A mirror, yes, but not only in image. In orientation, time begins again backward. But here's the catch. For us, inside that new universe, everything would feel forward. Entropy would increase, just as it always does. Stars would form. Planets would coalesce. Life maybe would rise. And no one would suspect that, from the outside, time had flipped. Because inside the loop, the arrow always points away from the bounce. It's only when seen from beyond the loop, if such a perspective were even possible, that the symmetry becomes visible. That each cycle of the cosmos could be viewed like a ripple in a pond, moving outward from the bounce in both directions, with time running opposite in each. Two universes, two arrows, one source. It's a stunning vision, one that raises deep and strange questions. What does it mean for causality? If the laws of physics run identically in reverse, then could a cause follow its effect? Could memory run the other way? Could beings in that mirrored universe believe they're moving forward, just as we do, while from our perspective, they are drifting into our past? It begins to feel like philosophy, but the math is there. It whispers that time is not what we think it is, that it may be an emergent property, a consequence of entropy, not its master, that what we call past and future are just local preferences of a deeper system that loops and turns without direction. And then, more quietly, the question arises, what is death? In a universe where time folds? Not just the death of stars or species, but the death of meaning. If everything loops, if time reverses, if entropy resets, then where does finality go? What happens to endings? Perhaps they become beginnings. Not in a poetic way, but in a literal one. The last photon to fade in one universe becomes the seed of the first in another. The last whisper of structure gives birth to a new cascade of forms. It's not reincarnation. It's not resurrection. It's continuity, refracted. And if this is true, then the idea of forward is a trick of perception. We feel it because we must, because entropy demands it. But the cosmos feels no such pull, turns and turns again, and in each turn, forgets the last, but leaves a trace, a fingerprint in the constants, a wrinkle in the geometry, a cold spot in the sky, and perhaps more. Because if each cycle is slightly different, if the constants change, if the balance of forces drifts, then the universe is not just repeating. It is evolving, not toward perfection, not toward any destination, but through variation, through experimentation. Some cycles may be barren, empty of light or structure or possibility. Others may blaze with stars, burst with complexity, echo with thought, each iteration a new attempt, not with purpose, but with persistence. And that is something almost biological, not intelligent, not conscious, but iterative. A cosmos that grows not by design but by turning, a rhythm that refines. In such a view, our existence, our moment, this thin sliver of light between two eternities, is both nothing and everything. Because we may be one of the few brief moments in all of time where the universe knows itself, and then forgets, but perhaps not entirely. But if entropy resets, if time unwinds, then what becomes of memory? Not the memory held in brains or books or buried in the ground, but memory embedded in the universe itself, the patterns, the scars, the faint fingerprints of what once was. If a cosmos collapses and births again, can anything at all survive that transition? This is not just a question for physics. It's a question for meaning, because memory in its deepest sense is continuity. It's how the past whispers into the present, how identity forms. And if every cycle of the universe erases the last, completely, totally, then we are not just alone in space. We are alone in time, but perhaps not. There are hints, fragile and scattered, that the past might linger in more than concept. Some cosmological models suggest that while matter and structure may be destroyed in the bounce, certain features, certain mathematical shapes might carry over, not like a message, not like a preserved relic, but more like a mood, a tone, a gravitational echo that informs the next universe's shape without defining it. Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology touches on this. In his vision, when a universe grows so vast and thin that mass no longer matters, when particles lose their scale, what's left is a pure geometry, a conformal map of space-time. And it is this shape, he suggests, that connects one aeon to the next. Not a perfect transfer, not a repetition, but a transformation. Like one painting fading into another, where the brushstrokes remain, but the image changes. If that's true, then perhaps we are not a first draft. Perhaps we are the current verse in a poem written across the skin of time. And just as our universe carries traces of what came before, perhaps we too are leaving something behind, not of ourselves, but of structure, of form, of rhythm. But this rhythm is not stable, because each cycle may be warped, tilted, changed by what came before. The constants might shift, not by choice, but by necessity. If entropy reboots and time flips and the arrow resets, the next universe might unfold with slightly different rules. A little more dark energy, a little less gravity, a difference in the charge of an electron so small we'd never notice until the stars don't form the same. And with that small drift, everything changes. Some cycles may never reach complexity. No stars, no chemistry, no minds to question. They collapse as quietly as they began. Others, rare, balanced, improbable, may dance just long enough for awareness to arise, for atoms to align in ways that feel briefly like thought, like wonder, like us. And so we are left with a strange conclusion, that we are not inevitable, not necessary, but also not impossible. We are a kind of statistical blossom, not rare because we are special, but because the conditions that allow us are. And yet, here we are, looking out across a universe vast beyond comprehension, asking questions no other species, as far as we know, has ever asked. Questions not just about survival or curiosity, but about time and truth and endings. We might be temporary, but the questions we carry are timeless. Because in a looping universe, the most profound things are not the cycles themselves, but what arises within them. The brief flare of order, the breath of awareness, the capacity to wonder where it all begins, and where it goes when it ends. And maybe that wonder is the memory, not of past universes, but of this one. Maybe our stories, fleeting, fragile, forgotten, are part of the entropy. Maybe they echo not forward into another world, but outward into this one. Maybe they're written not in the stars, but in the silence between them. And if the universe forgets us, as it surely will, maybe that's all right, because we remembered it even for a moment. And that moment is real. And so we return to time, not as a number or a line or a ticking clock, but as a presence, a texture, something we move through and something that moves through us. Time in this vision is no longer a ruler but a wave. It rises, it breaks, it folds back in. Each universe is a crest on that wave, curling briefly before collapsing into foam, only to rise again, reshaped. And the arrow we feel, this forward pull, this drive from past to future, might be only our place on that wave. A local slope, a perspective. If entropy drives the arrow, and the arrow bends, then time is not absolute. It's situational. The way a traveler feels wind on their face only because they're moving through it. In another frame, in another cycle, the wind may come from behind. And this changes something subtle in how we understand ourselves. Because it means time does not flow like a river. There is no absolute current. There is only structure, curved, turning, echoing. And within that structure, we float. We exist in a small eddy, a swirl of order within a much greater sea of unfolding. We are used to thinking of the universe as aging, winding down, losing steam. But if the arrow flips, if entropy resets, if time itself loops, then aging is not decay. It's transformation. Death is not departure. It's transition. The final moment of our universe, so often imagined as silence, as heat death, as nothingness, may in fact be the hinge, the breath between exhale and inhale. And if that's true, then even the bleakest future is pregnant with motion. The collapse, slow and majestic, would not be a failure, but a return. The galaxies would drift apart not forever, but to their limit. The stars would die not to end light, but to prepare space. And when everything is gone, when all matter is smooth, all radiation stretched, all history dissolved into entropy, it would not be the end. It would be the still point, the cusp, the moment the wave turns. And in that moment, something astonishing happens. Not a rebirth in the mystical sense, not a reset button, but a reorganization, a shift in the canvas. The rules change, the constants tilt. A new cosmos blossoms from the residue of the last, not as a copy, but as a consequence. Not because it must, but because it can. And this is where meaning begins to emerge, not from purpose, but from possibility. We exist not because the universe planned us, but because the structure allowed us. We are not a final goal. We are a temporary pattern in a long unfolding. And yet we are real. The moment is real. The awareness is real. That is the miracle. Not that the universe repeats, but that, in repeating, it sometimes pauses just long enough for someone somewhere to notice, to ask, to wonder. And what a strange symmetry. Then, if in every cycle, some brief flicker of consciousness arises, perhaps different each time, perhaps unrecognizably so, and each flicker, unaware of all the others, still asks the same question. Where did we come from? And where are we going? Maybe the question itself is part of the pattern. A ripple that carries through the loops. Not the same voice, but the same gesture. And maybe that's the closest thing we'll ever get to immortality. Not a soul that survives, but a question that persists. Because in the end, time does not grant answers. It only allows the asking. And entropy, the great eraser, the quiet rewriter, doesn't erase meaning. It just keeps us moving, always forward. Even when the arrow flips, even when the cycle resets, we are not static beings. We are passengers on a spiral. And in the turning of that spiral, the universe becomes not a riddle to solve, but a story to tell. If the universe is a loop, then what does that say about us? Not just about the stars and the galaxies, the entropy and the arcs of time, but about the people standing in kitchens, in libraries, in forests, wondering quietly if any of this is real. What happens to meaning in a world that repeats itself? What happens to choice? It's a thought that slips into your mind late at night, uninvited, like a shadow at the edge of a campfire. If everything comes back around, again and again, if the universe cycles like a song with no final chord, then do we choose anything at all? Or are we merely echoes, moving through motions already made? Maybe you've said these words before. Maybe this question, right now, has already been asked in another version of you, in another round of the cosmos, with the same stars and the same moonlight. Maybe this is not your first time wondering. That idea, familiar to ancient philosophers and modern physicists alike, feels terrifying. The loss of agency, the flattening of choice, to imagine life not as a path unfolding, but as a track replaying, history repeating, tragedy cycling, love, heartbreak, birth, death, all rehearsed roles on an infinite stage. And yet, something in us resists that. Something wants to believe we are not bound, that we are new, that this breath, this decision, this thought has never happened before. So which is it? In the strictest version of a looping universe, where every cycle is identical, where the same atoms form the same people making the same choices, then yes, free will collapses. You are not choosing. You are repeating. And what feels like decision is merely memory playing forward. The illusion of freedom in a machine built to return. But that is only one version, and not the most interesting, because physics, real physics, suggests that even if the universe loops, it doesn't loop perfectly. The constants shift. Quantum randomness adds noise. Chaos magnifies tiny differences. What begins in symmetry ends in variation. In other words, the universe may loop, but never the same way twice. This is the sandbox model, the variation on a theme, the melody that keeps returning, but changes key each time it does. In that kind of cosmos, you are not a puppet. You are not a repetition. You are an improvisation. Yes, the stage is familiar. Yes, the laws are still the laws. Gravity pulls, light travels, entropy rises. But within that scaffold, the players move freely. Different storms form. Different stars explode. Different minds awaken. Consciousness may arise again and again, but not as a copy, as something new, something local, something truly alive. And if that's true, then so are you. Not because you are the first to be here, but because you are the first to be this. Your thoughts, your choices, your wonder in this moment, these have never happened before and will never happen again in exactly this form. Even in an infinite cycle, infinity does not imply repetition. It implies possibility. And maybe that's enough. Maybe meaning doesn't need to be anchored in permanence. Maybe it doesn't need to defy entropy or echo through universes. Maybe it only needs to burn bright for one breath. And that is enough. But still, the question lingers. If everything fades, if even identity dissolves into the loop, then what is the point? Why build? Why strive? Why write poetry or raise children or try to be kind in a world that turns forever? The answer might be hidden in the question itself. Because why implies care. And to care is to affirm meaning, even in the face of repetition. The very act of asking, what's the point, is itself the point. It is the mind refusing to vanish quietly. It is the universe, briefly through you, becoming self-aware. And maybe that's the miracle, not that we live forever, not that we matter absolutely, but that in a turning universe where nothing is permanent, we still make meaning anyway. We still choose. We still love. We still hope. And those things, though small, are real as entropy, as real as gravity, as real as the loop. Perhaps what unsettles us most about a looping universe isn't the idea of repetition, but the idea of forgetting. Because if time resets and history remakes itself, and each cycle brings a new variation, what happens to all that came before? The laughter, the wars, the kindness, the mistakes. Do they vanish like mist at dawn? Does the universe remember? We cling to memory, as individuals, as civilizations. Memory tells us who we are. Without it, continuity breaks. And yet, in a cosmological loop, continuity is broken again and again. Worlds begin. Worlds end. Stars rise and fall. And everything that was is erased or rewritten or bent into something unrecognizable. Maybe we were here before, but not as us, not even as humans. Maybe consciousness bloomed once in a completely different form, in oceans of methane or networks of plasma, or silence too alien for thought. And maybe it asked the same questions. And maybe it, too, was swallowed by entropy, forgotten. But if forgetting is inevitable, what remains? Some might say nothing, that the loop is a prison, that meaning must be cumulative, linear, built on memory, that without a thread tying us to the past, we float, unanchored, in a sea of endless versions of ourselves. But others might say memory is not required for meaning, because meaning is not about duration, it's about depth. A single act of love, fleeting and unremembered, still changes the shape of a moment. A decision made in full awareness, even if no one recalls it, still echoes, if only in the fabric of now. In that sense, repetition does not erase value. It multiplies it, because in a looping universe, meaning is not stored. It is performed, again and again, not because it's remembered, but because it is possible. And what a thing that is, to imagine a cosmos so large, so ancient, so recursive, and yet still able to birth something tender, something brave, something fragile enough to care. We worry too about fate. If the universe loops, does that mean everything is determined? That we are trapped on tracks we cannot see? But fate is not the same as inevitability. A train on a loop track may return to the same stations, but what happens at each stop can change. The scenery, the conversations, the choices, the loop may shape the world, but it doesn't script it. And even if it did, even if our actions were echoes, even if free will was a kind of useful illusion, would that change how they feel? Does a sunset become less beautiful because the light follows physics? Does a song lose its meaning because the notes are arranged by math? We often confuse spontaneity with truth, as if only things unplanned can be real. But maybe the universe is composed of plans so large, so recursive, they allow for wonder not despite the pattern, but because of it. Maybe that's what we're doing here, not breaking the loop, but dancing inside it. And if that's true, then free will is not freedom from cause. It's freedom within context, the ability to shape what matters, even if we cannot shape the structure. The story loops, but the telling is ours. And so, we are left with a strange kind of agency, not absolute, not eternal, but meaningful within its moment. A chance to sculpt the ripple as it moves outward, knowing it will fade and ripple again. And isn't that what we already do, even in a universe we think is linear? We live, we choose, we die. And still we matter. We find meaning in moments, not because they last, but because they are. The loop doesn't diminish this. It deepens it. Because to live as if it's the only time, when it may not be, adds weight, not lessens it. The awareness that this moment could repeat doesn't empty it, fills it with care. Would you still say these words if you knew you'd said them before? Yes, because you don't remember, and that makes the choice real. There's another way to see it, not as repetition, not as fate, but as rhythm, because everything in the universe pulses. The orbit of planets, the rise and fall of tides, the breath of lungs, the flicker of thought. Even time, at its most fundamental level, may not be a straight river but a wave, and in a wave nothing stays still. But nothing is truly lost either. The crest becomes the trough, the rise folds into the fall, and though the motion returns, it is never exactly the same. Each rhythm carries a memory, not in facts, but in form. So what if this is how the cosmos lives? In rhythm, not a script, not a loop that repeats like a machine, but a music that plays again and again, each time with subtle variation. A symphony of cycles, each universe a new movement, each moment your moment, a note played only once in a sea of resonance. And in that music, perhaps, meaning doesn't depend on being the first or the last. It depends on being present. Even if the song has been played before, even if it will be played again. This note, this life is yours to carry, yours to shape, yours to hear. So we ask again, does anything matter if everything happens again? Yes, precisely because it does. If we knew that kindness would echo, even faintly, into the next world, would we not be more kind? If we knew that cruelty, even forgotten, still colors the pattern, would we not be more careful? If we understood that each act is not isolated, but woven into the rhythm of being, wouldn't we listen more closely to how we live? The fear isn't that nothing matters. The fear is that everything might. And that is where responsibility begins, not in being watched or judged or remembered, but in recognizing that your choices resonate, even into the silence. That your presence adds a weight to the scale of what this world is, and what it becomes, even if only for a moment. And maybe that's the most honest form of meaning. Not eternal, not cosmic, but situated, local. A kindness done without applause. a question asked in solitude, a life lived with care, even if no one sees it from the outside. Because in a looping universe, the gods do not remember, but the universe feels. It shifts slightly with every iteration. A law bends, a symmetry breaks, constant drifts. And perhaps, though we can never prove it, those shifts are nudged by what lives inside the loop. By minds, by hearts, by choices, not as rulers of the cycle, but as participants in the rhythm. Dancing not to control, but to add color to the song. So no, repetition does not erase meaning. It requires it. Because without meaning, the loop is hollow. But with meaning, even fleeting, the loop becomes alive. And that may be the only kind of immortality we ever get. Not to last, but to echo. Maybe the scariest idea isn't that we're stuck in a loop. Maybe it's that we're not. That this version of the universe, this delicate structure of laws and chance and breath, might never come again. That this is it. Not the first, not the last, but the only you that ever will be. If the loop brings comfort, it's because it softens the edge of endings. It suggests we return. That some version of us stirs again under new stars, wearing different names. That the story goes on. That death isn't a door closing, but a curtain falling, ready to rise again on the next act. But if the loop is broken or imperfect or drifting, then this moment becomes more precious, not less. Meaning doesn't have to be eternal to be real. A spark is not a fire, but it is light. A single note may vanish, but it shapes the silence that follows. We search for permanence because we fear forgetting. But what if transience is the point? What if the universe loops not because it must, but because it can, because from that looping beauty arises, not in spite of the repetition, but within it, like the turning of seasons, like the spiral of galaxies, like the rhythm of a heart that knows only how to beat once, and again. In that turning, we are given something rare. Not answers, not certainty, but participation. The loop does not owe us understanding. It owes us nothing at all. And yet, here we are, thinking, choosing, creating. We live as if our actions matter, even when the cosmos says nothing. Even when the future is silent. Even when time curves back and erases our footprints. And that is the greatest defiance. To find meaning in a universe that does not hand it to you. To build a life not because it will last, but because you are here. Because now is real. Because the note is yours to sing, whether or not the music will repeat. So maybe it's not about whether the universe is a loop. Maybe the question is, what will you do with your moment inside it? Because whether this is the first cycle or the trillionth, whether we return or vanish forever, whether we are echoes or originals or something in between, we still have this. A breath, a choice, a voice. And in the vast turning of all things, perhaps that is enough. There comes a point in any inquiry, scientific, spiritual, or personal, where the trail vanishes. The data stops. The signals blur. The mind circles and circles but never escapes. We imagine that if we only build a better telescope, a deeper equation, a faster particle accelerator, we will find the answer. But what if there is no outside to reach? What if the universe is not just looping, but self-contained in a way that forbids vantage? Not metaphorically, literally. The way the surface of a sphere has no edge, only curve. You can walk forward forever and never leave, never find a boundary. Only keep returning to where you began. Now imagine that same geometry in time, in causality, in understanding. That's what quantum gravity suggests. Not just a new theory of particles or forces, but a new structure for reality itself. Space may not be smooth. Time may not be continuous. Beneath the apparent flow of things, the fabric of the cosmos may be made of discrete loops. Tiny units of space and time knitted together like threads in an invisible weave. This is the strange world of loop quantum cosmology, where the Big Bang is not a beginning, but a bounce, where singularities are replaced by bridges, where space-time is not an arena, but a player, not the stage but the dance. And in that dance, something haunting emerges. There may be no absolute view, no God's eye, no platform from which to observe the whole, because we are inside the loop, inside the very thing we're trying to understand. Every observation we make is from within. Every equation we write is drawn on the wall of the cave we live in. We send light into the dark, hoping to map what lies beyond. But if the cave is closed, if the universe is self-wrapping, then our maps are always incomplete. This is not defeat, it's humility. Even string theory, with all its elegance and ambition, spirals into this same paradox. 10 dimensions, vibrating filaments, multiverses branching like nerves in an infinite mind. Yet for all its beauty, says little so far about what came before the bang or what lies after the dark, because it too is built from within. An architecture of logic, yes, but logic drawn from a brain that evolved to run from predators and shapestone tools. A brain wrapped in bias, in fear, in hope, in illusion, and still somehow we ask the most astonishing questions. What is space? What is time? What is nothing? We imagine answers like keys, as if there were a final door and if only we could name it. Write the math cleanly enough, look far enough, think clearly enough, we could step outside the loop and finally see. But maybe there is no outside. Maybe to exist is to be enclosed. And yet, what a strange enclosure this is. Because though we are trapped within the loop, we are also aware of the trap. We can point to it. We can name it. We can say, this is the circle, even as we walk it. No telescope can pierce that boundary. No equation can lift us beyond it. But a question might. Not to escape, but to reflect. Because when you ask, truly ask, what is beyond? You are not measuring the universe. You are measuring yourself. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the loop is not something to be solved. Maybe it is something to be mirrored. Understood not through mastery, but through becoming. We often think of science as conquest, light against shadow. But in this realm, the realm of origins, of endings, of totalities, science becomes something gentler. A form of listening. A willingness to be shaped by what we cannot grasp. And in that listening, perhaps something extraordinary happens. The loop, turning endlessly, begins to wonder, not through miracles, not through design, but through us. If we are inside the loop and the loop is all there is, then what does it mean to ask where it came from? It's a question that folds in on itself. Paradox made of curiosity, because to ask where already assumes space. To ask when assumes time. But if space and time are born inside the loop, emergent properties, not absolute frames, then origin itself becomes a local illusion. Like asking where the surface of a sphere begins. Or which note in a song is the first, when the song has no start. So maybe we've been asking the wrong kinds of questions. Maybe we should stop seeking what lies before the loop and start asking what lies through it. What emerges when a system is allowed to turn endlessly? What structures, what minds, what meanings arise when the fabric of being is bent into a circle? Because something has arisen. Here we are, thinking, asking, reaching, not gods, not omniscient, but present, aware. A flicker of thought in the darkness, wondering why there is anything instead of nothing. And perhaps that is not incidental. We often imagine the universe as separate from us, cold, indifferent. But if we are part of the loop, if the loop is all there is, then consciousness, however fleeting, is not outside the equation. It is one of its results, one of its patterns, not the goal, but not a mistake, a moment where the loop reflects on itself. Think of it this way: a mirror has no awareness. It reflects because of its shape. But what if a mirror became so curved, so recursive, so folded inward, that the reflections began to notice themselves, to question the act of reflection? Would that not be something like mind? Perhaps we are that fold, not separate from the cosmos, but a crease in its surface, a place where thought arises not by magic, but by structure. Not as an exception, but as a natural consequence of enough complexity, enough pattern, enough time. And here's the strange thing. In that moment, when the universe becomes aware of itself, even faintly, even through us, it changes. Not in substance, not in physical law, but in quality, in resonance. Because now the loop is not only spinning, it is listening. We listen to the universe, but perhaps the universe, through us, listens back. This is not mysticism. It is symmetry. A circle can never see its own edge, but it can feel the turn. A system cannot explain itself from the outside, but it can evolve patterns that mirror the whole. This is what consciousness might be. Not a solution, but a resonance, tuning. And perhaps it is this tuning that gives birth to meaning. Not meaning imposed from above, not handed down by a designer, but grown from within, like gravity from mass, like music from motion, like thought from loops. In that view, we are not mistakes. We are not ghosts. We are not accidents flung from chaos. We are inevitable once the loop grows rich enough, strange enough, self-folded enough to imagine itself. And in that imagination, we ask, what lies beyond? What lies before? What lies within? And in asking, we circle back to the place we began. The questions don't end, but they echo deeper, because the loop is not a prison. It is a spiral, and each turn brings not repetition but depth. So the loop turns, the math folds, the questions echo, and we remain watching from within, unable to step outside, yet still moved by something deeper than measurement. Because at some point, understanding stops being about answers and starts becoming about awareness, not of facts, but of position, of presence. We are not outside the system. We are the system looking inward, the reflection caught in the curvature of its own lens. Somewhere, deep in the equations, the universe speaks in symmetries. A field reflects another field. A force balances a motion. Particle mirrors a twin. And somewhere in that vast ballet of structure and form, we find ourselves small, soft, fallible, but aware. And the awareness does something impossible. It brings the loop to life, not because it changes the physics, but because it completes the arc. We imagine truth as a light we can shine, but maybe it is a glow that rises slowly from inside. Maybe the answers we seek are not out there in the stars, but within the act of seeking itself. Maybe the loop isn't something we're meant to break or solve or transcend. Maybe we are meant to feel its shape in our bones, to live inside its turning, to whisper questions to the void, knowing the void might whisper back, not in words but in rhythm. And if that's true, then perhaps the greatest question is not what is the loop, but who are we inside it? Because a loop alone is structure, but a loop that wonders is alive. And in this universe, where beginnings collapse into endings, where time curves like breath and entropy dances with rebirth, perhaps what truly matters is not how far we reach or how much we know, but how deeply we listen, how fully we recognize that even in a cosmos of infinite turning, even in a system too vast to escape, something within still tries to understand, still dares to care, still aches to belong. And maybe that ache, silent, persistent, unresolved, is the most honest part of the loop. The point where physics becomes poetry, where science bows quietly to wonder, where we, for one brief moment, stop trying to escape and start learning how to stay, not outside, but within. So the next time you find yourself beneath the night sky, with all its stillness and quiet light, let yourself wonder not just at the stars, but at the strange possibility that they've been seen before. Not by others, but by you, or by something like you in another breath of the same universe. Maybe this moment isn't new. Maybe the sky has held this exact silence, this exact thought, more than once. The feeling that you are small but watching, alone, but somehow not forgotten. It might be that what you're staring into isn't distance, but reflection, not just of light but of time, a mirror made of gravity and memory, curving inward until every beginning folds into its own echo. And so the real question isn't whether this is the first time the stars have shone this way, or whether this thought has ever crossed a mind before. The question that lingers, soft and unresolvable, is whether it ever ends. Whether, after all the loops and bounces and breaths of being, there comes a final stillness, or whether the silence we feel under the stars is not an ending, but the soft exhale before another beginning. And if that's true, then maybe right now, in this fleeting moment of wonder, the universe is doing something it has done 1,000 times before, remembering itself through you.